Now let's focus on a major challenge facing local governments: affordable housing and homelessness. Joining me, two county administrators. We have Ian Coyle from Livingston County, New York, and Jeff Aluotto from Hamilton County, Ohio. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So, very important topic. What's the scale of the problem of affordable housing? Jeff, how have you seen things change in your counties in recent years?
It's one of those, what I think ICMA would call wicked issues, one of those big issues in the nation that are so pivotal for many things. We know that the issue of affordable housing is not just important from a housing perspective, but it also impacts so many other things. It impacts competitiveness in a region, it impacts healthcare, it impacts economic mobility, and I think the pandemic has served to exacerbate that, especially as we've seen housing prices, rental prices continue to increase, and we've seen that locally as well.
Have you been seeing that as well, Ian?
Yeah, so I'm a small rural county. I've only got 65,000 people, but even my homelessness and kind of housing affordability issue as a crisis, if you will, even on a small level, on a small number, we've seen this sort of an expansion and a growth in that area.
Jeff, let's talk about ARPA. So how has that enabled you to really build up your housing plan?
Our commissioners have been very aggressive on using ARPA as a tool to help us for the first time address affordable housing to scale. So we received $158 million in ARPA funding. A full quarter of that is going towards housing. We have $40 million going towards housing, with $25 million of that going towards housing production.
So I mean, you're talking big numbers there. Is that going to solve the problem completely, or do you still need to supplement those funds?
I don't think we can say it's going to solve the problem, but we think that it's going to start to make an impact. And when we leverage that with realizing that even with those dollars, we're not the only game in town. There's a lot of partners out there that are going to help us with this. We're hoping to be able to start to move the needle a bit on the problem.
And Ian, you've had an anti-poverty plan that's come up with some very creative ways to impact a lot of the causes of homelessness. So how did that get started?
So it got started as a strategic planning effort. We've got 32 departments in the county, so we kind of took a step back and said, what departments are involved tangentially, directly, indirectly, whatever, with the issue of poverty in general. We sort of all got together and said, this is how we need to plan. We need a cohesive effort. We all have a little tiny slice, in terms of inputs that lead to the outputs of trying to reduce poverty.
And so tell me, what's been your approach to funding, and has ARPA helped that?
ARPA has certainly helped it. So we have a land bank corporation, which is a separate 501c3 that we started to kind of support, dilapidated housing, restore housing, tear down housing, and then when we do restore it and revitalize a neighborhood one property at a time, the people that are coming in there under the bylaws are people of a low mod income. And we did use a draw from ARPA to support that and sort of give them some more leverage, some more funds.
And Jeff, what have you done that's beyond ARPA for funding?
I would say that the county really started to get into the affordable housing game back in 2016, and we had to be creative about it. We had to find other sources of funding. We used some general funding. We used some of our other entitlement funding, like our home investment partnership funding. We used community development block grants. And I'd say since 2016, we've placed around a little over $8 million into affordable housing, creating maybe over 800 units, but nothing like we're able to deal with now with ARPA. But we've also leveraged the talents of our staff.
I love that, tapping into the talents of the staff. That's fantastic. So I want to ask you, Ian, so how important is it to ensure that all available housing is used and remains viable?
We have a lot of communities that have cities that were built for a certain population that, in industry change, there was, we call it the Rust Belt, but they're sort of revitalizing themselves. So you have some changing demographics. So you have a housing stock that was built for so many people that people number isn't there anymore. We're kind of going unit by unit because we're small enough and nimble enough to be able to do that, as opposed to, we don't have the kind of the scale that Jeff has, but, with what we have, that's our best path forward.
How important is it to consistently revisit and reassess your work?
We're getting $158 million from the federal government. Yeah. So I think the public has a right to expect that by the time we are done spending this in a few years, that we're going to have made a sizable and robust impact on the problem. So I think it's incredibly important that as we go through this, we continue to make sure that we're spending the dollars effectively, that we're looking around, making sure that we're following other best practices, that we learn from other communities and what they're doing, and that we can apply those lessons, because without that, the last thing we want to do is get to the end of this line on funding and we haven't made the impact that we wanted.
And finally, do you see a better future for the problem of homelessness across the country? And what's one key lesson for other counties and cities? And I'll start with you, Ian.
ARPA funding and other funding is really game-changing kind of funding, transformative funding for counties. It's the largest infusion of federal cash in the nation's history to local governments. So, we have to capitalize on that. And how we capitalize on it is creative ideas and solutions around kind of age-old problems that we can't combat ourselves. We have to have partners to do it.
Got to work together. Well, Jeff Aluotto, Ian Coyle, thank you both so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.